There is power in a union because there's power in the working class. I'm sorry I'm not there, comrades. Duty calls. There's lots going on over here. I've got some legal meetings and the struggle goes on, but I'm there in spirit. I've been in SIGTUR right from the start and been a proud member all the way through. I know there are very many comrades there in the room today, and my best wishes and solidarity, not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of all the officers, staff and members of the Maritime Union of Australia, and broadly as President of the ITF and Chairman of the Dock Workers from the International Transport Workers Federation. SIGTUR has been important in continuing to define a political understanding of the great challenges facing the labour movement and the working class. It's unerringly and determinedly and courageously continued to meet to make sure that trade union activism and political activism doesn't just align itself into certain segments or into certain silos. We reach out to people that haven't got the capacity to fight for themselves, that aren't in the mainstream structures, that aren't necessarily in the existing labour structures and institutional structures, but nevertheless need exactly the same protection and support and be surrounded with the sort of resources of solidarity that we can bring to bear. And in fact, in many areas are more important than the institutional approach. We see this in South Africa. And I've been at SIGTUR conferences in South Africa, and welcome and solidarity to my South African comrades there. Worked very closely with Randall Howard over a long period of time. We had a number of SIGTUR conferences over there. There was a real opportunity and remains a real opportunity in South Africa to have a third way. Not a society driven by capitalism, not a society driven by elitism, not a society driven by cynicism, not a society driven by Rupert Murdoch, and as a mouthpiece and a driver for the neoliberal and neoconservative agenda, but a society that genuinely holds to account things like social justice, reconciliation, proper balance, is able to challenge elitism in all of its forms. And there are many forms, not just corporate elitism and the continuing polarisation of wealth and power, but the elitism within sexism, within racism, ageism. All of these things, these elites and these divisions that elites construct are about dividing working men and women and their communities and ultimately dividing the working class. See, our class enemies know who we are. They see us as enemies. One of the big challenges of the labour movement and the progressive movement is to do exactly the same, to identify our enemies, to identify the nature of struggle, to identify the united front, where we can work, where we can't work, who the genuine forces are, where the progressive forces are, where the leadership is, so that we can forge political and industrial and economic and cultural and social power predicated upon the wishes and the needs of the majority, and not dominated by the few, and not dominated by their self-interest, and not dominated by their greed. So they're worthy targets that SIGTUR set out to do, and it was a different world when we established the process. Generally, the global union federations were called ITSs, International Trade Secretariats, for goodness sakes. You know, they were camouflaged, unions camouflaged to be something else. The ICFTU was just a safe house for the State Department in the US. Let's face it, they were Cold War institutions that were basically defined in their nature of organising to be able to challenge the Eastern Bloc countries and the Eastern Bloc unions and the alternative progressive unionism from the WFTU. That's where we started. But the world's changed enormously since then. I'm the president of the ITF. Sharon Burrows is the secretary of the ITUC, now the leading trade union movement in the world. I mean, Sharon addressed the conference of SIGTUR on numerous occasions. These are extraordinary qualitative leaps for the progressive movement. To be able not to insinuate ourselves into leadership, but to be able to define a character and a substance and a direction and a form of leadership predicated upon empowering working men and women regardless of their social and economic backgrounds, regardless of whether they come from Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, Europe, North America, South America and Africa, and particularly Africa. You know, the one continent that's been left out of the economic model for the world, that's been left out of free trade, that has been left to the vestiges, you know, the destructive vestiges and the remnants of colonialism, where there's not a willingness to go and engage and repair and rehabilitate. But we're there, and I can assure those comrades from Africa we will remain there until true justice is formed. And true justice can only be formed and found in the ability of sovereign national identity, democratic identity. And again, to the South African comrades, you are just as important as when Nelson Mandela walked out of the nick down there on what's-the-name island, that we have not changed in our support for the vision that you articulate. And we know there are challenges. There are challenges in the tripartite approach between the party and COSATU and ANC. There are contradictions. But in a world driven by contradictions that are favourable to neoliberalism, where democracy is being defined around this so-called concentration of personality around the individual, where collectivism and forms of collectivism, forms of communal activity, forms of cooperative activity like trade unions and labour unions are put up as being as an antipathy to what makes the world go round. Well, that's bullshit. And we know it's bullshit. If we can't in a world driven by contradiction, in a world driven, you know, by the tremendous damage, environmental damage, by rampant capitalism, without any regard, short-termism, in a world that's still recovering and recuperating, picking itself up off the floor from the global financial crisis, a whole generation in Europe, maybe 2 generations in Europe of young working men and women that will never have the opportunity to own their own home, that will never have the opportunity to have a career, a decent career, that will never have an opportunity to finish their education, that will never have an opportunity to have the health services that should be a prerequisite and a fundamental to every human being in the world. Not just Europe. In the developing countries, in Latin America and in South America, throughout Asia and indeed Africa again. The global financial crisis will continue to resonate with the damage, the resonant damage of that greed, negligence and corruption that ultimately lie at the heart of the leadership of capitalism and the so-called free trade and neoliberal agenda. So we don't mind taking it on. We're part of a generation of activists that take on hard struggles. People die, people go to jail, people are prosecuted. I'm in my suit today and probably a few of you get a bit of humour out of it. I've got my green tie on, I am Irish, you know. But you know, what do they call a union official, particularly from the MUA in a suit? The defendant. They're out to get us. They're out to get us wherever we are and wherever we turn up. I know there's big struggles up there in Korea, and I hope to meet our comrades from the Korean railway workers next week. And I'm talking to the RTBU, Bob Nanva, seeing what we can do from solidarity. See, we're organising from the ground up with inside the ITF a progressive agenda based on an understanding of class struggle. The world has moved on. We have to redefine and constantly redefine the United Front, the Georgy Dimitrov definition of the United Progressive Front, where we can work with people that are able to push the struggle in the direction of where it should go in favour of working men and women and their communities, in the favour of human beings. Ultimately, we're humanists, that we are driven by compassion and not greed, that we're driven by the needs of others and not just our own, that we're driven by the fact that there are generations of working men and women, not only our sons and daughters, but sons and daughters of other people, and they need the same nurturing and support that we had, and that those activists gave us, and those political leaders gave us. Well, our mandate is to make sure that we leave it for someone else. That's a proud thing to do. And that's a real point of a life. That's a life where you can make a difference, and it's important to make a difference. I'm not sure if the KMU is there, but Crispin Beltrans was now passed on, was a great friend of mine, and worked very closely with Crispin in developing a progressive trade union response within the Philippines. Very, very many. One of the proudest things was when Nelson Mandela came to Australia, thanked the Maritime Union of Australia for the role that we played in the international oil embargo on South Africa that he said was one of the critical elements for the apartheid regime to roll over and disappear into the whole of history that they deserve to occupy. Comrades, good luck with your considerations. Know that we have a new world order. A new world order of internationalism is the old world order of internationalism. Working men and women, comrades, solidarity action, but also campaigning, organising, young people, women, young workers, to be able to reach out to them, to be able to give them an understanding and an ownership, to be able to give them a language and an identity, to be able to get proper gender balance so that all human beings, regardless of their gender, have the same opportunity. Lofty heights? Don't think so. These are the fundamentals of the human condition, and these are the fundamentals of our progressive movement. So I'm not there in person, I am there in heart. I can assure you that I and all of my comrades and the network that I represent around the world continue to aspire for the very best for all. And we will continue to do that as long as SIGTUR and as long as people that are there and are participating in the SIGTUR process are prepared to stand with us. We can't be defeated. United, we cannot be defeated. Congratulations on this week. It's important. Let's get the campaign going. Let's continue to reach out. Let's build union power. Let's build workers' power. Good on you, comrades.